So today we're presenting intramedullary rods. The group is Colleen, Jake, Nicholas, and me, Noah. Oh, why can't I go to the next slide? Okay. So what are these rods? So these rods are typically made out of titanium or stainless steel, and you place them in the medulla or the inner cavity of the bone. We use these rods to stabilize fractured bones and share the weight put on the bone, and it's considered a secondary fracture healing. We typically use these rods on longer bones such as femurs, and they are typically left in the body permanently, but in certain circumstances, we can take them out. How's it done? Well, you find your fractured bone, create an incision on the fractured bone, insert the rod into the bone cavity, screw the rod into the bone, and then stitch the patient up and call it a day. So the history of these rods can be seen throughout history, and we can even see it all the way back to 3,500 years ago, and we found one of these rods in a mummy. We can also see it in 1524 in Mexico. The first medical journal was in the 1800s, but it was actually invented in 1939 by a German surgeon called Gerhard Kunscher. And it was typically performed on World War II veterans at the time, or World War II soldiers at the time. So pros and cons to these rods is the pros is that it supports the injured bones, shares the load with the bone instead of the other supports that takes the load off the bone, like a splint or whatnot. It also leads to a 95% good union, 95% of the time, it's durable and flexible, and increases the healing rate. Cons is that it causes infections, bruising. The rod can be displaced or broken over time. And yeah, so those screws can break.
So now I'm going to be going over the present and the problems that the intramedullary rods present. So infection can occur at the surgical site or even within the bone. Although the risk of infection is not significant, it is a potential complication of intramedullary rods. And despite the stability provided by intramedullary rods, some fractures may not heal correctly, and the term non-union refers to the failure of the bone to heal properly, while the term delayed union means a slower healing process than was expected. So some patients will experience pain and discomfort. Individuals with a rod implanted may experience ongoing pain or discomfort that flares up during specific movements or activities. And this can be due to a variety of factors, including the presence of hardware, scar tissue, or nerve irritation. So now the benefits that the intramedullary rods have on society. So the stability, alignment, and the faster healing. Intramedullary rods help to stabilize fractured bones by preventing movement and influencing proper alignment during the healing of the bone. Stabilizing the fractured bone speeds up the bone healing process, and this can result in quicker recovery as compared to other surgical techniques. So the stability provided by intramedullary rods allows for earlier mobilization and weight placement on the bone. Properly aligned and stabilized fractures treated with intramedullary rods can improve long-term functional outcomes. Patients may experience improved joint function and reduced risk of complications like arthritis. So another thing that makes these rods so awesome is the versatility. This allows doctors to use them for different fractures and patient sizes. This versatility makes them a valuable tool for orthopedic surgeons in treating a range of fractures. And the early mobilization reduces the risk of complications associated with prolonged immobility, such as severe muscle loss or even degenerate joint disease.
Okay, so there are a few different things that researchers are looking into as potential to improve these rods. First, there's this idea of an expandable intramedullary rod, which is inserted as a thinner rod and is expanded once insertion is complete, as you can see in the photo over there. This concept would remove the need to have interlocking nails and would reduce reaming, which is when the bone is drilled into, which makes this rod much less invasive to the bone. And then the self-locking intramedullary rod is another concept that reduces reaming and interlocking screws, but it's different in that the rod is inserted and then attached to the bone through an auto-locking process. And then there are also a few concepts for rods that focus on reducing infection, such as the antiseptic coated rod and regenerative medicine. The antiseptic coated rod is a rod covered in a certain antibiotic, and it works with the bone to reduce inflammation. And then other researchers are looking into the application of regenerative medicine, which looks into different ways in which stem cells can be regenerated to reduce healing time and infection. And most of this research centers around the material in which the rod uses. And then one last interesting concept is a biodegradable rod, which would essentially degrade in the body after a certain amount of time and therefore get rid of the need to remove the rod, which is a lot more convenient for the patient because it's one less procedure. However, it must be noted that all of these ideas are either concepts or in the early stages of testing and analyzing the potential negative effects. So just to reiterate, in this table, you can see that all of the major problems with intramedullary rods are being attacked by these potential solutions. Because this device is relatively simple, many of the main issues can be improved or resolved. However, there are certain problems that will most likely never be completely solved. Though the antiseptic coated rods in regenerative medicine could reduce post-op pain and infection, it is not possible to completely remove the pain of inserting a rod into a bone. And then the concepts that I discussed earlier only focused on one or two main issues, which means that an intramedullary rod that combines these advancements and improves all the problems is highly unlikely to be created soon. Finally, even though the biodegradable rod has been conceptualized by researchers, the reproducibility and cost of this rod will not be practical for a while, which means that the issue of removing the rod will be a problem for a while.
So now moving on to the connections to BME 101, some of the extensive properties of the titanium rods are going to be the mass in moles of titanium, especially in the creation process of these rods, and the mass of blood when considering the system of the body surrounding the rod. Likewise, the intensive properties will be the density of the titanium and the concentration of the oxygen in the blood surrounding the system. One important process linking to BME 101 is going to be the process of creating titanium. And this is done in a steady state reacting system, actually in a batch reactor. And it's done through the Kroll process, which takes titanium in a compound form and moves it to an isolated element. And it's important to understand molar flow rates and stoichiometric coefficients, as well as yield rates to understand how much titanium can be taken from a given process and creating the most efficient reaction to get the most titanium for this rod. Likewise, this reaction requires an activation energy, which must be supplied through circuits and electronics, and understanding how to limit and support this, so not giving too much or too little energy so that the reaction occurs. Another important process is the corrosion of titanium, which is in a dynamic reacting system. And titanium actually doesn't corrode too much, but when it does first corrode, it forms a film of protection around itself. And so when understanding this film of protection, we need to examine how quickly this is generated and how quickly this leaves the system of the titanium to understand how long the titanium can last within the body. Likewise, titanium doesn't really corrode in O2-rich environments. So when it's constantly surrounded by blood, such as it is in the body, it won't really corrode as much. So understanding the flow rates of blood in and out of this system and how quickly blood enters and how much of it stays to support this lack of corrosion. Similarly, the erosion, you don't want too much titanium leaving the body itself, as it could enter other parts of the body, which could be potentially damaging. Another important thing is the force applied on the bones and body, and this can be found with a strain gauge and understanding using a load cell on the titanium to understand how much pressure can be applied before it starts feeling strain or it starts becoming less structurally integral. And understanding this is important to understand how much strain the body can put on this rod or the rod can put on the body before it is too dangerous to actually be inside. And this also uses a Wheatstone bridge as seen in the image, because the more strain pushed onto the rod, the higher the resistance, which can be used to correlate to the force applied. Another important thing is the conductivity of titanium. Titanium isn't actually that conductive, which makes it a good biomedical implant because it won't interfere with the nervous or other electrical systems in the body. Likewise, it won't actually interfere with MRIs or other types of radiation, making it useful as an implant because it allows for further operation and examination. Moving on to the connections to curriculum, BME 403 and 404 are going to be important because they discuss the musculoskeletal system, and that includes loads, forces, and just the fundamentals of the body. So understanding where the rod can go, how it can go there, and just general stuff like that. BME 410 is going to mainly discuss the materials. So Why can we use titanium? What are the pros and cons of titanium versus other materials? And which material should we use in a given circumstance? And finally, BME 426 and 7, basic biomedical imaging. That's going to be important because osteogenesis imperfecta, one of the main diseases associated with intramedullary rods, is found through an X-ray. So understanding how to use an X-ray, etc. And also it's important to understand how titanium shows up in different machines such as MRIs, where it doesn't really have a signal.